Evelyn Harper wasn't the kind of person who backed down from a challenge. She had spent years chasing stories that others were too scared to touch. Some called her fearless. Others thought she was reckless. But Evelyn didn't care what people said about her. What mattered most was the truth, and she'd do whatever it took to uncover it. Her journey into journalism hadn't been glamorous. She grew up in a small town where opportunities were scarce and dreams often felt out of reach. Her parents worked hard but never seemed to get ahead. Evelyn remembered sitting at the kitchen table as a child, listening to her mother talk about how unfair life could be. Those conversations stuck with her, planting a seed deep inside her heart, a desire to fight for justice. Even if it meant standing alone, years later, Evelyn found herself living in the city, working as an investigative journalist. Her articles exposed corruption, fraud, and abuse of power. Each story brought its own risks, but Evelyn thrived on the thrill of discovery. Every lead she followed, every secret she uncovered, reminded her why she chose this path. Still, nothing could have prepared her for what lay ahead. It all began one quiet evening when Evelyn returned home after a long day at work. As she unlocked her apartment door, something caught her eye, a folded piece of paper lying on the floor just outside. At first glance, it looked like junk mail, but something about it made her pause. Kneeling down, she picked it up and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was messy, almost frantic, and the message was short. Look closer at Victor Kane. Victor Kane. The name sent a shiver down her spine. Everyone knew who he was, or at least they thought they did. He was a billionaire businessman, one of the richest men in the country. His face rarely appeared in the media, but his influence was everywhere. From real estate to tech companies, Victor owned half the city. People whispered about him in hushed tones, calling him ruthless and calculating. Some even claimed he had ties to illegal activities, though no one dared to say it aloud. If you spoke against Victor Kane, bad things tended to happen. Evelyn stared at the note, her mind racing. Who left this for her? And why? She couldn't ignore it. Something about the urgency in the scribbled words pulled at her curiosity. That night, instead of sleeping, she sat at her desk, poring over old news articles and public records related to Victor. What started as a simple search quickly turned into a rabbit hole. The more she dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Victor's rise to power was anything but ordinary. He came from humble beginnings, much like Evelyn herself, but his climb to the top was steeped in controversy. Rumors swirled about shady business deals, bribes, and intimidation tactics. There were whispers of missing persons connected to his properties, people who vanished without a trace. Most chilling of all, Evelyn stumbled upon reports linking Victor to human trafficking rings operating under the radar. It sounded impossible, like something out of a crime thriller. Yet the pieces fit together too perfectly to dismiss. By morning, Evelyn's resolve was set. She couldn't let this go. Whatever Victor Kane was hiding, she needed to expose it, not just for the sake of her career, but for the countless lives he might have ruined along the way. She packed her bag with essentials, a notebook, her phone, and a camera. Then, armed with determination, she headed out to follow the trail left by her mysterious informant. The address on the note led her to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a desolate place, far removed from prying eyes. Rusty metal walls loomed overhead and graffiti covered every surface. Evelyn hesitated before stepping inside, her instincts warning her to turn back. But she pushed forward, reminding herself why she was there. This wasn't just about her, it was about the victims who couldn't speak for themselves. Inside, the air smelled musty, and the floor creaked beneath her feet. She moved cautiously, scanning the space for anything unusual. In the corner, she spotted a stack of boxes half hidden behind a tarp. Pulling it aside, she discovered files stuffed with documents, contracts, bank statements, and photos. Her hands trembled as she flipped through them. Each page revealed a darker layer of Victor's empire, confirming her worst fears. Human trafficking, money laundering, blackmail. It was all there in black and white. As Evelyn snapped pictures of the evidence, a noise startled her. Footsteps echoed nearby, slow and deliberate. Her pulse quickened and she ducked behind a pile of crates, clutching her camera tightly. Peering around the edge, she saw two men enter the room. One carried a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. They weren't police officers or security guards, they looked like hired muscle, the kind of men who didn't ask questions. "She has to be here somewhere," one of them muttered, his voice low and menacing. Evelyn held her breath, willing herself to stay silent. The other man nodded, scanning the area with sharp eyes. "Boss wants her dealt with," he said grimly. "No loose ends." Evelyn's stomach churned. "Dealt with?" The phrase replayed in her mind, sending waves of panic through her body. She tightened her grip on her camera, knowing she couldn't let them find her, not yet. Not until she got the proof she needed. Slowly, she shifted her position, trying to create some distance between herself and the men, but fate wasn't on her side. The flashlight beam swept across the floor, landing on the tarp she'd disturbed earlier. One of the men walked over, lifting it to reveal the boxes beneath. "Looks like we've got company," he sneered, turning toward Evelyn's hiding spot. Before she could react, rough hands grabbed her arms, pulling her to her feet. Panic surged through her as she struggled against their grip, but it was useless. They were stronger, faster. Evelyn's mind raced, searching for a way out, but escape seemed impossible. Well, a smooth voice drawled from the doorway. Evelyn looked up to see Victor Kane himself standing there, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit. His presence commanded attention, exuding authority and control. His piercing gaze locked onto hers, studying her like a predator sizing up its prey. "You're quite persistent, aren't you?" Victor said, stepping closer. His tone was calm, almost amused, but there was an underlying edge to it that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "I have to admit, I underestimated you." Evelyn forced herself to meet his stare, swallowing her fear. "You can't keep hiding forever," she shot back, her voice steadier than she expected. "Sooner or later, the truth comes out." Victor chuckled softly, shaking his head. But you see, my dear, the truth is whatever I say it is." He paused, leaning in slightly. "Now, let's talk about your options. You can stop digging into things that don't concern you, or we can make sure you regret ever starting." For a moment, Evelyn hesitated. Fear clawed at her insides, but she refused to back down. "Go ahead," she said defiantly. "Do your worst. The world will know what you've done." Something flickered in Victor's eyes, anger, frustration, maybe even admiration, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. With a wave of his hand, he signaled for his men to take her away. As they dragged her toward the exit, Evelyn shouted over her shoulder, "Please don't hurt her." Her voice cracked, the weight of her words sinking in. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Victor understood exactly who she meant. Smirking, he watched as she was shoved into a sleek black car parked outside. Rain pattered against the windows as the vehicle sped off into the night, leaving Evelyn's fate uncertain. As the miles rolled by, Evelyn's mind raced. She thought about her younger sister, the only family she had left. They shared a bond, deeper than blood, a connection forged through years of laughter, tears, and unwavering support. Her sister didn't know about Evelyn's investigation, didn't realize the danger she was in. If anything happened to her because of Evelyn's actions, she'd never forgive herself. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. Crying wouldn't help now. She needed to focus, to figure out a way to survive and protect the people she loved. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would test her strength, courage, and resolve in ways she couldn't imagine. The car ride felt endless, each bump in the road jolting Evelyn back to reality. Her wrists ached from the tight grip of the handcuffs, and her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. Where were they taking her? What would happen next? She tried to focus on the details, the sound of the engine, the faint hum of the tires against wet pavement, but fear kept creeping in, wrapping itself around her chest like a vice. When the car finally stopped, Evelyn was pulled out roughly and shoved into what looked like an old mansion. The place reeked of dampness and neglect, its grandeur faded under layers of dust and decay. Heavy footsteps echoed behind her as she was led down a narrow staircase into the basement. The air grew colder with every step, and the dim light from a single bulb above cast long, eerie shadows on the walls. They pushed her into a chair and bound her hands tightly behind her back. Then, without a word, they left her alone. For the first time since being captured, Evelyn allowed herself to breathe deeply, though it didn't bring much relief. The room was small, windowless, and suffocating. A single wooden table stood nearby, its surface scarred with scratches and stains that hinted at years of use or misuse. Evelyn's thoughts immediately turned to her sister. Was she safe? Did Victor know about her too? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic coursing through her veins. She had always been the protector, the one who shielded her younger sibling from harm. Now she felt utterly powerless, trapped in this nightmare while her sister remained blissfully unaware of the danger lurking just beyond their doorstep. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Evelyn lost track of time. The only sounds were the occasional creak of the house settling and the distant drip of water somewhere in the shadows. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but it was nothing compared to the ache of uncertainty. Would anyone even notice she was gone? She hadn't told anyone where she was going, not wanting to put others at risk. That decision now felt like a mistake. Then, just when exhaustion began to take over, the door creaked open. Victor Kane stepped inside, his presence filling the tiny space like a storm cloud. He carried himself with the same calm authority he'd shown earlier. But there was something different about him now, a hardness in his eyes that made Evelyn's skin crawl. I must say, "I admire your persistence," he said, pulling up a chair across from her. His voice was smooth, almost friendly, but the threat beneath it was unmistakable. "Not many people have the guts to stand up to me." Evelyn glared at him, refusing to show weakness. "You think you're untouchable," she spat, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. "But no one is above the law, Victor, not even you." He chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "Ah, the law. Such a fragile concept. Isn't it? Laws are written by men and men can be persuaded?" His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed unnervingly sharp in the dim light. "Tell me, Evelyn, do you really believe exposing me will change anything? People like me don't disappear because of a few articles or photos. We adapt. We survive." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. Part of her wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down, she knew there was truth in what he said. Men like Victor operated in the shadows, pulling strings and bending rules to suit their needs. Taking him down wouldn't be easy, in fact, it might cost her everything. "Why are you doing this?" she asked after a long pause, her voice quieter now. "What could possibly make all this worth it?" Victor's expression shifted slightly, his mask of confidence slipping for just a moment. He stared at her, his gaze intense and unreadable. "Power," he said simply. "It's the only thing that matters. Money fades, loyalty betrays, but power endures." The simplicity of his answer chilled her. It wasn't greed driving him, it was something darker, more primal. Power wasn't just a means to an end for Victor. It was the end itself. And Evelyn realized with a sinking feeling that she was dealing with someone who saw human lives as pawns in his game. Before she could respond, Victor leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Now, let's talk about your situation," he continued, his tone businesslike. "You've seen things you shouldn't have. You've dug too deep. Normally I'd eliminate such threats without hesitation, but I find myself curious about you, Evelyn. Why do you care so much? What drives you to risk everything for strangers?" For a moment, Evelyn hesitated. She didn't owe him an explanation, but something in his question struck a chord. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not with anger or hatred, but with genuine curiosity. Or maybe it was the sheer absurdity of the situation, sitting here, having a conversation with the man who had kidnapped her. "I care because someone has to," she replied finally, meeting his gaze head-on. "Because if no one speaks up, then nothing changes. People like you win, and everyone else suffers. I won't let that happen, not while I still have breath in my body." Victor studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Admirable," he murmured. "Foolish but admirable." Standing up, he adjusted his jacket and turned toward the door. You'll have plenty of time to reconsider your stance, he added over his shoulder. Think carefully, Evelyn. Your choices may determine whether your sister remains unharmed. With that, he left, closing the door firmly behind him. The click of the lock echoed in the silence, leaving Evelyn alone once again. Her heart pounded in her chest, his final words replaying in her mind like a broken record. Your sister. He knew about her. Of course he did. Someone like Victor wouldn't overlook such a detail. Despair threatened to consume her, but Evelyn forced herself to push it aside. Giving in wouldn't help her or her sister. She needed to stay strong to find a way out of this mess. But how? Bound to a chair in a locked basement with no phone and no all eyes, escape seemed impossible. Still, Evelyn refused to give up hope. Over the next few hours, she tested her restraints, twisting and turning until her wrists burned. Slowly, painstakingly, she managed to loosen them enough to slip one hand free. Freedom tasted sweet, even in such small doses. Once untied, she scanned the room for anything useful, a tool, a weapon, anything, but found nothing except the rickety wooden table. Just as frustration began to set in, she heard voices outside the door. 2 men Victor's henchmen were, talking in low tones. One of them mentioned moving her to another location soon. Evelyn's pulse quickened. If they transferred her, her chances of survival would drop drastically. She had to act fast. Using the edge of the table, she broke off a jagged piece of wood, creating a makeshift weapon. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Hiding it behind her back, she returned to the chair, pretending to still be bound. When the door opened and the 2 men entered, she struck quickly, catching one off guard with the shard of wood. Chaos erupted as the second man lunged at her, but adrenaline gave her strength. After a brief struggle, she managed to knock him. Unconscious, panting, Evelyn stood over the fallen men, her heart racing. This was her chance. Grabbing a set of keys from one of their belts, she unlocked the door and stepped cautiously into the hallway. The mansion was eerily quiet, its vast emptiness both a blessing and a curse. Every shadow seemed to hide danger. Every creak of the floorboards a potential alarm. She moved quickly, sticking to the edges of rooms and avoiding open spaces. Eventually, she found herself in the garage, where a sleek SUV sat idling. Hoping to find something useful inside, she approached it cautiously. The trunk was partially open, revealing stacks of documents, weapons, and other incriminating items. Evelyn's eyes widened as she realized what she'd stumbled upon, a treasure trove of evidence that could bring Victor's empire crashing down. Her hands shook as she snapped photos with her hidden phone, knowing these images could be her ticket to freedom. But before she could finish, heavy footsteps echoed behind her. Turning slowly, she came face to face with Victor once again. This time, however, there was no trace of amusement in his eyes, only cold fury. I knew you'd try something like this, he said, raising a gun and aiming it directly at her. You're resourceful, I'll give you that. But you're also running out of time. Evelyn froze, her mind scrambling for a way out. She had come so far, fought so hard, she couldn't let it end here. Summoning every ounce of courage, she took a step forward, holding his gaze steadily. You can kill me, she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. But you can't kill the truth. Someone will find out what you've done. Someone will stop you. Victor hesitated, his finger hovering over the trigger. For a fleeting moment, doubt flickered in his eyes. Then, with a resigned sigh, he lowered the gun slightly. Take her back downstairs, he ordered curtly, gesturing to his men who had appeared behind him. We'll deal with her later. As Evelyn was dragged away, she clung to the knowledge that she'd succeeded in sending the photos to a trusted contact moments before being caught. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, someone was waiting, and maybe, just maybe, they'd be able to pick up where she left off. Evelyn's heart sank as she was dragged back to the basement. She had come so close, so painfully close to escaping. The photos she'd managed to send were her only hope now, but doubt gnawed at her mind. Had they reached anyone? Would someone act on them in time? Or had Victor already covered his tracks, erasing any chance of justice? The men threw her roughly into the chair again, retying her hands with even tighter knots this time. Evelyn bit back a cry of pain, refusing to give them the satisfaction. Her body ached from the earlier struggle, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she forced herself to stay alert. Giving up wasn't an option, not when her sister's life hung in the balance. Victor stood by the doorway, watching silently as his men secured her. His expression was unreadable, a mask of calm that sent chills down her spine. When the henchmen finished their work and left the room, he stepped closer, pulling up the same chair he'd sat on before. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched like a taut wire, heavy with unspoken threats and simmering tension. "You're persistent," Victor finally said, breaking the quiet. His tone was almost conversational, but there was no warmth in it. "I'll give you that. Most people would have given up by now." Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You haven't won yet," she shot back, her voice steady, despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. "No matter what you do, someone will find out the truth. Someone always does." Victor tilted his head slightly, studying her as if trying to understand what made her tick. "And what makes you think that?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Do you really believe in some grand idea of justice? That good always triumphs over evil." "Yes," Evelyn replied without hesitation. "Because if I didn't, then everything I've fought for would be meaningless. People like you might think you're untouchable, but history proves otherwise. Eventually, the truth comes out, and when it does, you'll wish you hadn't hurt so many lives." Victor leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Ah, idealism, how quaint." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "But tell me, Evelyn, how far are you willing to go for your ideals? Are you prepared to sacrifice everything?" "Everyone?" His question hit her like a punch. To the gut, sacrifice everyone? The implication was clear. He still held her sister's safety over her head like a sword. Evelyn swallowed hard, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "If it means stopping you, then yes," she said firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. "But don't think for a second that threatening my family will make me stop fighting." Victor chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You're brave, I'll admit that. But bravery alone won't save you, or them." He stood up abruptly, pacing the small room with slow, deliberate steps. "Here's the thing, Evelyn, I don't want to kill you. In fact, I'd rather avoid it if possible. But you leave me. No choice. You keep pushing, digging, resisting, and sooner or later someone has to pay the price." Evelyn clenched her fists, frustration boiling inside her. "Then why not just let me go?" she demanded, her voice rising. "What do you gain by keeping me here? Killing me won't erase what I've uncovered. It won't undo the damage you've done." Victor stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Because it's not about undoing anything," he said coldly. "It's about control. If I let you walk away, others will see it as weakness. They'll think they can challenge me too. And I can't allow that." His words sent a chill through her. This wasn't just about silencing her, it was about sending a message. Victor thrived on fear, using it to maintain his grip on power. Letting her go would mean admitting vulnerability, something he clearly couldn't afford to do. As if sensing her despair, Victor softened his tone slightly. "Look, Evelyn, I'm not unreasonable. If you agree to drop this investigation, if you promise to disappear quietly, I'll ensure your sister remains safe. You'll never hear from me again. Think about it." For a split second, Evelyn considered. His offer, could she walk away? Pretend none of this had happened? The thought was tempting, especially knowing her sister's life depended on her decision. But deep down, she knew she couldn't live with herself if she backed down now. Too much was at stake, not just her own freedom, but the lives of countless others who had suffered because of Victor's greed. "No deal," she said firmly, lifting her chin. "I won't stop until you're exposed for what you are." Victor sighed, shaking his head as though disappointed but unsurprised. "Very well," he murmured. "Then we'll do this my way." He signaled for his men to enter the room again. They grabbed Evelyn roughly, hauling her to her feet and dragging her toward the door. She struggled against them, kicking and twisting. in a desperate attempt to break free, but it was useless. Their grip was ironclad. Leaving her no room to maneuver, they took her upstairs to a large study filled with expensive furniture and shelves, lined with books. A desk dominated the center of the room, its polished surface gleaming under the dim light. On it lay a laptop, its screen glowing softly. Victor gestured for his men to set her down in a chair facing the desk, then dismissed them with a wave of his hand. Once they were alone, Victor sat behind the desk and opened the laptop. He tapped a few keys, bringing up footage from security cameras scattered throughout the mansion. Evelyn watched in horror as the screen displayed images of her earlier escape attempt, the fight in the garage, the unconscious guards, the trunk filled with evidence. Each frame felt like a punch to the gut, reminding her how close she'd come to succeeding. "See this?" Victor asked, pointing to the screen. "This is why I can't trust you. Every move you make, every decision you take, it all ends the same way. You resist, you fight, and eventually you lose." Evelyn glared at him, her jaw tightening. "You can record me, threaten me, lock me up, but you can't break me," she spat. "I'll never stop fighting you, Victor. Not while I'm alive." To her surprise, Victor smiled, a genuine smile this time, devoid of malice. That's exactly why I admire you," he admitted. "Most people crumble under pressure. They beg, plead, promise anything to survive. But you stand firm. It's remarkable, really." His words caught her off guard. Was he genuinely impressed? Or was this another tactic to manipulate her? Before she could respond, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "But admiration doesn't change facts," he continued, his tone shifting back to cold calculation. "And the fact is, you're running out of options. Your little stunt in the garage bought you nothing but more trouble. Do you honestly think those photos you sent will make a difference? By now, my people will have ensured they lead nowhere." Dread pooled in Evelyn's stomach. Had Victor already intercepted the evidence? Was all her effort wasted? She refused to believe it. Somewhere out there, someone must have received the files? Someone must care enough to act. I don't need your intimidation tactics, she snapped, trying to hide the uncertainty creeping into her voice. Even if you destroy the evidence, you can't destroy the truth. Sooner or later, it'll catch up to you. Victor raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by her defiance. "Perhaps," he conceded. "But by then, it'll be too late for you, at least." He stood up, closing the laptop with a decisive click. "Now, let's get one thing straight, Evelyn. You're leaving this house tonight. Whether you leave alive or in pieces depends entirely on you." Fear surged through her, but she masked it with anger. "Go ahead, Victor," she challenged. "Do your worst. But remember this, you may win battles, but you'll never win the war." His smile faded, replaced by a look of icy determination. "We'll see about that," he said quietly. With a snap of his fingers, his men re-entered the room and dragged her toward the front door outside. A black van waited, its engine idling. Evelyn's pulse raced as she realized where they were taking her. This wasn't just another move to a different location, it was the endgame. Whatever Victor had planned, it wouldn't involve letting her go. As they shoved her into the van, Evelyn caught sight of her reflection in the side mirror. Her face was pale, her hair disheveled, but her eyes burned with resolve. No matter what happened next, she vowed to fight until her last breath. Because giving up wasn't an option, not for her, and certainly not for the countless victims counting on her to expose the monster who had ruined their lives. The van ride was a blur of fear and determination. Evelyn sat in the back, her hands bound tightly, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew this could be the end. Victor wasn't the kind of man who left loose ends. But even as panic clawed at her chest, she refused to let it consume her. If tonight was her last stand, she'd go down fighting. As the van rumbled along dark roads, Evelyn replayed every moment since her capture, searching for anything she might have missed, a detail, a clue, a chance to turn the tables. Her thoughts kept circling back to the photos she'd sent before being caught. Had they reached anyone? Was someone out there piecing together the puzzle she'd risked everything to uncover? She clung to that hope like a lifeline, even as doubt whispered in her ear. The van eventually slowed and came to a stop. The doors swung open, revealing a desolate stretch of land surrounded by dense trees. It looked like the middle of nowhere, a perfect place to make someone disappear forever. Evelyn's stomach churned as two men pulled her out roughly and shoved her toward a waiting figure, Victor Kane. He stood under the dim glow of a single overhead light, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp and calculating. In his hand he held a phone, scrolling through it idly. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable. "Let's not waste time," he said. Gesturing for his men to follow him deeper into the woods, Evelyn stumbled along, her legs weak from hours of sitting tied up. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she forced herself to keep moving. Fear was a weight pressing down on her, but beneath it burned a stubborn spark of defiance. She wouldn't beg or plead not to Victor, not to anyone. If this was how it ended, she'd face it head-on. They reached a clearing where another vehicle waited, a sleek SUV, parked near a shallow ditch. Victor turned to face Evelyn, his voice calm but laced with menace. "You've caused me a lot of trouble," he said, stepping closer. "More than anyone else ever has. And now you'll understand why crossing me is a mistake." Evelyn met his gaze, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "You think this changes anything?" she shot back. "Even if you kill me, the truth will come out. Someone will find those files, someone will expose you." Victor smirked, clearly amused by her bravado. "Ah, the eternal optimist," he mused. "It's almost charming. But tell me, Evelyn, who exactly is going to stop me? Your friends? The police? They're all too scared or too bought off to do anything about me?" Before she could respond, one of the henchmen handed Victor a small device. He examined it briefly, then nodded. "Good news," he said mockingly. "My team confirms? Your little stunt with the photos won't cause any problems. Whatever you sent is already contained, no loose threads." Evelyn's heart sank, but she masked her despair with anger. "You can erase the evidence, but you can't erase the truth." She spat. "People know what you've done. They'll talk. They'll fight back." Victor chuckled softly, shaking his head. "People are cowards, Evelyn. They look the other way when it suits them. Trust me, I've built an empire on that fact." He paused, leaning in slightly. Enough chit-chat. Let's finish this." He signaled to his men, who grabbed Evelyn and dragged her toward the ditch. Panic surged through her veins, but she dug her heels into the ground, resisting with every ounce of strength she had. "You won't get away with this!" she shouted, her voice echoing through the trees. "Someone will stop you!" Victor didn't respond. Instead, he watched impassively as his men forced her to her knees beside the ditch. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to show weakness. This wasn't how her story would end, not yet. Just as one of the men raised a weapon, a sudden noise pierced the silence, a distant rumble that grew louder with each passing second. Headlights appeared through the trees, illuminating the clearing. Victor's expression shifted from calm to furious in an instant. "What the hell is this?" he barked, spinning around to confront the intruders. A car skidded to a halt nearby, its tires kicking up dirt and gravel. Doors flew open and figures poured out, armed officers wearing tactical gear. "Police, drop your weapons!" A commanding voice shouted. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Victor's men hesitated, glancing at their boss for instructions. Victor himself stood frozen, his jaw clenched tight. Then, without warning, chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the air as Victor's men opened fire on the approaching officers. Evelyn hit the ground instinctively, covering her head as bullets whizzed past. Amid the confusion, she spotted an opportunity. One of the officers noticed her and shouted, "Get her out of here!" Another dashed toward her, pulling her to her feet and shielding her with his body. Together, they sprinted toward the safety of the vehicles while the firefight raged behind them. Once inside a police cruiser, Evelyn collapsed onto the seat, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Through the window, she watched as reinforcements arrived, overwhelming Victor's men. The tide had turned, but Evelyn knew the battle wasn't over, not completely. Back at the station, Evelyn recounted everything she knew. pouring out details about Victor's operations, the documents she'd uncovered, and the horrors she'd witnessed. The officers listened intently, their expressions growing darker with each revelation. By morning, warrants were issued, raids conducted, and arrests made. Victor's empire began to crumble under the weight of evidence brought forth by Evelyn's courage, but despite the progress, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that Victor was still out there somewhere, plotting his next move. As she sat in a safe house, reunited with her sister, she vowed to stay vigilant. The fight wasn't over not until justice was served. And no matter how dangerous the road ahead might be, Evelyn knew she'd walk it willingly, for herself, for her family, and for everyone who deserved a world free from monsters like Victor Kane. Evelyn sat in the safe house, staring out the window as dawn broke over the horizon. The first rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the darkness she'd endured for what felt like an eternity. Her body was sore, her mind exhausted, but there was a flicker of hope inside her, a fragile flame that refused to be extinguished. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, letting the weight of fear lift just slightly. Her sister, sitting across from her on the couch, reached out and took her hand. "You're safe now," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're both safe." Evelyn nodded, though she couldn't bring herself to fully believe it. Safe? That word felt foreign after everything she'd been through. Victor Kane's empire was crumbling, his men arrested, his operations dismantled, but he was still out there, somewhere, and until he was behind bars, Evelyn knew she couldn't let her guard down. The police had promised protection, assigning officers to watch over them around the clock. It was comforting, but not enough to erase the memories of Victor's cold gaze or the sound of his voice promising retribution. Evelyn replayed those moments in her mind constantly, searching for answers. How had they found her in time? Who had tipped off the authorities? As if reading her thoughts, her sister spoke up. "They told me someone sent the photos you managed to take," she said hesitantly. "Whoever it was, they got them into the right hands." The police started investigating Victor almost immediately. Evelyn frowned, piecing together the timeline. She remembered sending the files before being caught, but she hadn't known who might receive them or whether they'd act quickly enough. Someone had risked their life to ensure the truth came out. Someone brave enough to defy Victor Kane. But who? Her questions were interrupted by a knock at the door. A familiar face appeared when the officer opened it. Detective Ryan Cole, the man Evelyn had worked with on previous cases. He stepped inside, his expression serious but kind. "How are you holding up?" he asked, pulling up a chair beside her. "I've been better," Evelyn admitted with a weak smile. "But I'll survive." Ryan nodded, glancing briefly at her sister before turning back to Evelyn. "I wanted to update you on where things stand. We've rounded up most of Victor's key players, and we've seized a lot of evidence, documents, bank records, even recordings. Enough to put him away. For good if we can find him." "But you haven't found him yet?" Evelyn said flatly. It wasn't a question. She could see the frustration in Ryan's eyes. "No," he admitted. "He slipped through our fingers, but we're closing in. Every day we uncover more connections, more leads. He's running out of places to hide." Evelyn leaned forward, her voice firm. "You need to stop him, Ryan. Not just for me, for everyone he's hurt, if he gets away with this." "He won't," Ryan interrupted, his tone resolute. "I promise you, we'll get him. This isn't just about justice anymore, it's personal for all of us." His words brought some comfort, but Evelyn knew promises weren't guarantees. Victor was cunning, resourceful, and ruthless. He wouldn't go down without a fight. Still, she appreciated Ryan's determination. Over the years, he'd proven himself to be trustworthy, a rare ally in a world full of corruption. The next few days passed in a blur of interviews, debriefings, and restless nights. Evelyn tried to focus on rebuilding her life, spending time with her sister and catching up on the days they'd lost. But the shadow of Victor loomed large, casting doubt over every moment of peace. She jumped at sudden noises, avoided crowded places, and double-checked locks compulsively. Her sister noticed and did her best to reassure her. But Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that danger was still lurking nearby. Then, one evening, the phone rang. Evelyn answered cautiously, her heart skipping a beat when Ryan's voice came. Through the line, "We found him," he said simply. At a private airstrip, he was trying to flee the country. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by anger. "Is he under arrest?" she demanded. "Yes," Ryan replied. "It wasn't easy. He had armed guards with him, and there was a standoff, but we got him. He's in custody now." For a moment, Evelyn couldn't speak. The news hit her like a wave, washing away weeks of fear and uncertainty. Victor Kane, the man who had terrorized so many lives, was finally behind bars. Justice, it seemed, had prevailed. "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you for not giving up," Ryan's voice softened. "None of this would have happened without you, Evelyn. You risked everything to expose the truth. Don't forget that." After hanging up, Evelyn turned to her sister, who was watching her expectantly. "They caught him," Evelyn said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Victor's in jail." Her sister hugged her tightly, both of them crying tears of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, Evelyn allowed herself to feel hopeful about the future. The nightmare was over, or at least the worst of it was. In the weeks that followed, Victor's trial dominated headlines. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Documents linking him to illegal activities, testimonies from victims, and recordings of his own incriminating words. There was no way out for him this time. When the verdict came in guilty on all counts, Evelyn watched the news with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because justice had been served. Sadness because so much damage had already been done. With Victor locked away, Evelyn slowly began to rebuild her life. She returned to journalism, using her platform to shine a light on issues others were too afraid to address. Her story inspired countless people to speak out against injustice, proving that even in the darkest times, courage could make a difference. One evening, as she stood on her apartment balcony watching the city lights twinkle below, Evelyn reflected on everything she'd been through. The scars, both visible and invisible, would always remain, reminders of the battles she'd fought and the lives she'd touched. But she was stronger now, more determined than ever to keep fighting for what was right. Her sister joined her on the balcony, handing her a cup of tea. "What are you thinking about?" she asked gently. Evelyn smiled, looking out at the horizon. "Just how far we've come," she replied, "and how much farther we still have to go." Her sister nodded, leaning against her shoulder. Together they stood in silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the night sky. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Evelyn knew she wasn't alone. As long as there were people willing to stand up for justice, the fight would continue, and someday, maybe the world would be a little brighter because of it.